Marcus Reed stood on the warehouse floor at 6:52 in the morning, a scanner still warm in his hand, when David Pruitt told him he was finished. 20 coworkers watched. Nobody spoke. Marcus set the scanner on the belt, said nothing about the manufactured write-up, and walked out into the cold Richmond air. He sat in his truck for a long moment, then dialed a number he had not used in 3 years. 15 minutes later, David Pruitt's phone rang. He did not recognize the voice. He would not forget it. Watch how fast power changes hands when the wrong man gets underestimated. The Holleran Freight and Logistics warehouse ran on schedules tighter than most people's patience, and Marcus Reed had never once missed a shift in 6 years. He arrived before the overhead lights hummed on, left after the last truck cleared the dock, and in between he did the kind of quiet, competent work that nobody thanked him for, and everybody quietly depended on. The other night shift workers liked him without making a show of it. He remembered their kids' names, covered shifts when someone's car broke down, split his lunch with the new guys who forgot theirs, and never once raised his voice. Even on the nights the schedule fell apart around him like a house made of paper. That morning had started like any other. Marcus clocked in at 5:40, checked the manifest against the previous night's count, and noticed the same discrepancy he had flagged twice before: inventory numbers that did not add up on 2 pallets marked for a federal shipping contract. He had mentioned it to David Pruitt once, months earlier, standing in this exact spot, and been told to mind his lane and let the numbers people handle the numbers. He had not mentioned it again out loud. He had simply written the figures down in a small notebook he kept in his truck, the way a man keeps a spare key he hopes never to need. Pruitt called him into the glass-walled office at 6:40. Through the window, Renee Okafor from Human Resources watched with a tightness in her jaw that she tried to hide behind a coffee cup she was not actually drinking from. "We're letting you go," Pruitt said, sliding a folder across the desk without meeting his eyes. "Repeated inventory errors. It's documented. Corporate wants a clean record." Marcus looked at the folder. He did not open it. "Those numbers aren't mine. They're on your shift. They're wrong on purpose," Marcus said, quiet, not accusing, just stating a fact he had carried for a long time, the way a man states the weather. "You know that better than I do." Pruitt's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping once beneath his ear. "Clean out your locker. Security will walk you out if I have to ask twice." Renee stepped forward from the doorway, the closest she had come in 6 years to interrupting one of Pruitt's decisions. "David, if there's a discrepancy on the report, procedure says we pull the original manifest before termination, not after." "Noted," Pruitt said without looking at her. Overruled. Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked back onto the floor in front of everyone. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He nodded once at the men on his line, the way he might on any other morning, and kept walking. Something about the stillness of it unsettled Renee more than shouting would have. She watched him go through the glass, coffee forgotten in her hand, and something low in her chest told her this was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of something she did not yet have a name for. 2 floors up, in the regional office that oversaw Halloran's compliance reporting, Elena Whitfield was reviewing footage from the warehouse cameras as part of a routine audit into the location's unusually high turnover rate. She watched the exchange in real time without sound, watched a man get fired without a single raised hand, a single wasted word, watched him walk out like someone who had already decided the outcome did not belong to David Pruitt anymore. She rewound it once. She watched it again. She made a note in the margin of her legal pad. She did not yet know why the note felt important. She only knew that it did. Marcus sat in his truck in the parking lot for 6 full minutes before he picked up his phone. His hands did not shake, though his heart was moving fast enough that he could feel it in his throat. He scrolled to a contact he had not opened in 3 years, a name saved simply as TW, and pressed call before he could talk himself out of it. Marcus Reed, the voice on the other end, said, surprised, warm, careful, the voice of a man choosing each word. "It's been a long time. I heard about Angela. I should have called." "You should have," Marcus said, without bitterness. "But that's not why I'm calling now. I need 10 minutes of your attention, Thomas, and then I'll go back to my life, and you won't hear from me again unless you want to." "You have it. All of it." Marcus told him about the inventory discrepancy on the federal contract pallets. He told him the date he had first flagged it, and the date he had been told to drop it and mind his lane. He told him he had just been fired for it, in front of 20 coworkers, on a write-up that had his name on numbers he had never touched. There was a long pause on the line, the kind that carried weight. "You understand what happens if I look into this properly?" "I understand what happens if you don't," Marcus said. "I've got a 9-year-old at home who thinks her father makes an honest living loading trucks. I'd like that to still be true tomorrow, one way or another." 15 minutes after Marcus was fired, David Pruitt's phone rang in his office. It was not a customer. It was not corporate HR calling to rubber stamp the paperwork. It was a man named Thomas Whitcomb, whose name appeared nowhere on Pruitt's org chart, but whose voice made Pruitt sit up straighter in his chair without quite knowing why. "I understand there was a termination this morning," Whitcomb said. Pleasant, unhurried, terrifying in its calm. "I'd like the full personnel file and the last 6 months of inventory logs sent to my office by end of day." Pruitt hung up confused, unsettled, and told himself it was nothing, some corporate box-checking exercise, and went back to his coffee. He had no idea he had just made the second biggest mistake of his career, right on the heels of the first one, 3 hours earlier. That evening, before any of it had time to matter to anyone but the two men who understood it, Marcus picked up his daughter from school like he always did. Maya Reed, 9 years old, climbed into the truck with a backpack twice her size, and a story about a science project involving baking soda and a volcano that had gone, in her exact words, extremely well, actually, better than Tyler's, whose volcano had only fizzled a little. Marcus laughed for the first time all day, a real laugh that surprised him. He asked about the volcano, about her teacher, about whether she wanted tacos or the leftover chicken from Sunday. He did not mention the warehouse. He did not mention the folder, or the walk across the floor, or the 15-minute phone call still sitting in his chest like a held breath. Maya did not need to carry what he was carrying. Not yet, maybe not ever, if he could manage it. At home, they made tacos together, Maya standing on a step stool cutting tomatoes with a butter knife she insisted counted as real cooking, the way she insisted every year around this time. The kitchen smelled like cumin and warm tortillas, and for 20 minutes Marcus let himself exist only as her father, nothing else, no folder, no glass office, no call sitting unfinished somewhere between Richmond and a boardroom he had not set foot in for 3 years. Later, after Maya was asleep, he sat alone at the kitchen table with a photograph of his late wife, Angela, propped against the salt shaker the way it had been for 3 years, worn soft at the corners from being moved and set back down. He did not talk to it the way people did in movies, with big speeches meant for an audience. He just looked at it for a while, the way a man looks at the only person who ever fully understood the shape of him. "I said something today," he told her finally, quiet, like she might actually answer. "First time in 3 years I let that part of myself talk." Angela had been the one who understood why he walked away from the life he used to have the government contracts, the boardrooms, and the version of himself that built systems instead of loading trucks onto a dock at 5 in the morning. After she died, none of it had meant anything to him except as a life he did not want Maya raised inside. A life of long hours and longer absences. He had wanted simple. He had wanted safe. He had wanted a father who came home at a normal hour and made tacos on a Tuesday and never once had to explain to his daughter why he had missed another dinner for another meeting that mattered more to someone else than it did to her. He had not expected simple to require a phone call to Thomas Whitcomb. But watching Maya's science fair volcano dry on the counter under a paper towel, he did not regret making it. Across town, in an office that stayed lit long after the warehouse went dark, Thomas Whitcomb convened an emergency call with Corvain Holdings legal counsel. He did not explain everything. He explained enough. A founding advisor to the company's original supply chain audit system, a man who had helped build the very framework that kept Corvain's federal contracts intact, had just been terminated from a subsidiary warehouse on a fabricated write-up after flagging real inventory irregularities on a federal contract twice and being ignored both times. "Pull the shipping records for that location," Whitcomb said, quietly. "I don't want this handled at the regional level. I want Elena Whitfield looped in directly. She's already got eyes on that site, and I trust her instincts." David Pruitt spent that same evening at a bar 2 miles from the warehouse, telling a table of regional managers that he had cleaned up a problem employee that morning, someone who had been slow, sloppy, always second-guessing the numbers. He laughed about it over his second beer. He did not know that 40 minutes earlier, his name had been the second sentence in a call between a compliance officer and a board chairman he had never once met and did not know existed. Elena Whitfield's investigation began the way most quiet investigations did on paper. After hours, without anyone downstairs knowing it had started at all, she pulled personnel files for the Halloran location, cross-referenced termination reports against turnover data going back 2 years, and requested the full employment record for a man named Marcus Reed. What she found made her stop scrolling and read it twice, then a third time to be sure. Buried in the onboarding paperwork from 6 years earlier was a line that did not belong anywhere near a night shift hiring packet. Candidate referred directly by founding board counsel. Expedited placement approved, and no further review required. No explanation attached. No context. Just a sentence sitting quietly inside a warehouse employee's file, like it had been waiting for someone to finally notice it. She brought it to Renee Okafor the next morning, framing it as a routine compliance question, nothing more. Renee's hands went still on her keyboard. "I've seen that line before," Renee admitted, choosing her words carefully, glancing once toward Pruitt's office. "Years ago, I never understood it, and when I asked, corporate told me not to. Told me it was above my level. Did you ever ask David Pruitt about it directly?" Renee's silence answered the question before her words did, and when she finally spoke, her voice had dropped almost to nothing. "David doesn't like being reminded there's something he doesn't know. It makes him mean." Elena thanked her and left it there for the moment, but the unease followed her out of the building and into her car. She drove past the Halloran lot on her way home. Not intentionally, she told herself, just the route she always took, and saw Marcus Reed loading grocery bags into his truck, while a small girl in a purple backpack narrated something with both hands, wide gestures, the kind of story only a 9-year-old could tell with her whole body. He did not look like a man who had just lost his job. He looked like a man who had already decided the loss was temporary, an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. Elena parked, told herself it was for the investigation and nothing else, and walked over under the excuse of introducing herself properly. "Mr. Reed. Elena Whitfield, Corporate Compliance. I'm looking into what happened at the warehouse this morning." Marcus studied her for a moment. Not suspicious exactly, just careful. A man used to being underestimated who had learned quickly not to be careless about who was asking questions and why. That was fast. "Usually takes corporate a week to notice anything. I take my job seriously." "So did I," he said, until this morning proved it didn't matter. Maya tugged his sleeve, whispering something about being hungry, and Marcus's whole posture softened in a way Elena noticed and did not expect from a man who had just described his own firing without a trace of self-pity. Whatever else this man was, the girl came first, visibly, instantly, before anything else in the world. "I'd like to talk to you properly," Elena said. "Not in a parking lot, and not as part of a file." "I'm not hard to find," Marcus said. "I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." Back at Halloran, David Pruitt noticed the compliance officer's name showing up in one too many system logs and started deleting things he should not have touched in the first place. He told himself it was routine cleanup, nothing more, the kind of housekeeping any manager did before an audit. He told himself nobody would notice a handful of adjusted inventory entries from 3 months back, buried under 1,000 other lines nobody read closely. He was already too far behind the truth to understand how wrong he was. He called 2 warehouse supervisors into his office separately that week and made it clear, without quite saying it out loud, that questions about the federal contract discrepancy were not welcome and would not be rewarded. Both men nodded and said nothing, because both men had mortgages and Pruitt had a long memory for who caused him trouble. Elena felt the resistance the moment she formally requested the original shipping manifests. Files that should have taken a day to produce took 3. Numbers that should have matched did not cleanly, the way careless mistakes usually did not either, but this had a different shape to it, deliberate, almost careful in its sloppiness. This was not carelessness. This had the texture of someone erasing footprints, while trying not to look like he was erasing anything at all. She reported the delay to Thomas Whitcomb, who told her to keep pulling the thread and to trust her instincts even when the pressure from above her preferred this stay a simple, contained HR matter, tidy and forgettable. "There's already talk upstairs about letting this settle quietly," he told her over the phone. "I need you to keep going anyway. I'll handle the pressure from my end." The pressure came anyway, direct and uncomfortable. Elena's own regional director called her into his office that same week and suggested, in the careful language executives used when they meant the opposite of what they said, that the Halloran matter might be better resolved as a simple personnel correction rather than a drawn-out investigation that could embarrass the company during contract renewal season. "Reinstate the employee, issue a private apology, and close the file," he told her. "Nobody needs the full picture made public." "The full picture includes federal contract fraud," Elena said. "I'm not closing anything until I understand what I'm looking at." He did not order her to stop. He did not have the authority to, not with Whitcomb already involved. But he made it clear, in the way he thanked her for her time, and did not offer to help further, that continuing came with a cost she would be paying alone if it went badly. Elena walked back to her office, closed the door, and kept working anyway. Marcus received a call from Whitcomb 2 days later, standing in his kitchen with the phone pressed to his ear, and Maya's homework spread across the table behind him. The board had enough preliminary evidence to open a formal inquiry, he was told, but they needed something only Marcus could give them: a signed statement, on the record, confirming his prior role in designing the audit framework Halloran's parent company still depended on to keep its federal contracts intact. It meant stepping back into a version of himself he had buried 3 years ago. Folder by folder, meeting by meeting, it meant the quiet life he had built for Maya would not stay quiet much longer, no matter how carefully he had constructed it. "There's a version of this where you stay anonymous," Whitcomb offered. "We use the evidence without your name attached. You go back to being nobody Halloran ever hears from again." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, the phone warm against his ear. "And Pruitt walks with a slap on the wrist because nobody with real standing put their name on it." "Possibly. Then that's not the version I want," Marcus said. "I spent 3 years being nobody on purpose. I can spend one afternoon being somebody if it means the next guy who flags a problem doesn't get walked out in front of his whole shift for it." He sat with that for a full day before deciding anything, walking the same 3 blocks around his neighborhood twice, the way he used to when a decision mattered. That evening, Maya was coloring at the kitchen table while Marcus made dinner, and without looking up from her drawing, she asked, in the plain, devastating way only a 9-year-old could manage, "Daddy, did you do something wrong? Is that why you don't have work anymore?" Tyler said his dad said grown-ups only lose their jobs if they mess up. Marcus set down the spoon. He crouched beside her chair until they were eye level, the way he always did for the conversations that mattered. "No, baby, I didn't do anything wrong. Somebody else did, and I let it go on too long because I didn't want to make trouble for anybody, including myself." "Are you going to make trouble now?" He thought about Angela. He thought about the folder Pruitt had slid across the desk with a straight face, about Renee's tight jaw through the glass, about the 2 supervisors he had heard had been quietly warned into silence. He thought about the version of fatherhood he wanted Maya to grow up watching, not a man who disappeared quietly when he was wronged, but a man who stood up when it mattered and sat back down when the standing was done. "Yeah," he said, brushing a curl off her forehead. "A little trouble. The right kind. The kind that fixes things instead of breaking them." 2 days after that conversation, Renee Okafor could not sleep. She had spent 6 years at Halloran being careful, being quiet, being the person who noticed things and said nothing because saying something had always carried a cost she could not afford to pay. She thought about her own 2 kids asleep down the hall, about the mortgage that depended on this job, about all the reasonable, sensible arguments for staying exactly where she was and letting someone braver handle it. But she kept thinking about Marcus Reed walking out of that office without raising his voice, and about the little girl in the purple backpack, and about how tired she was of being the person who knew and stayed silent anyway, year after year, discrepancy after discrepancy, telling herself it was not her fight. She copied an internal email thread onto a personal drive at 11 at night, hands trembling on the keyboard, and sent it anonymously to Elena Whitfield's compliance account before she could talk herself out of it and delete the whole thing instead. The email thread, dated 3 weeks before Marcus's termination, showed David Pruitt instructing a warehouse supervisor to adjust inventory records ahead of an upcoming federal audit, the same audit tied to the exact discrepancy Marcus had flagged twice and been ignored twice. Buried further down the thread was the real motive: plain and damning in black and white. Pruitt had been quietly diverting a portion of contracted freight inventory for over a year, funneling the difference through a shell shipping account tied to a cousin's small business 2 counties over. Marcus's original flag, if it had been investigated instead of buried under a shrug and a warning to mind his lane, would have exposed the whole scheme 18 months earlier. Pruitt had not fired Marcus over a manufactured inventory error. He had fired him 3 days before the federal audit team's scheduled site visit, specifically to remove the one employee who had already put the real numbers on paper somewhere and might say something before Pruitt finished covering his tracks for good. Elena read the thread twice, then a third time, feeling something cold settle into place behind her ribs. This was never a simple wrongful termination case. It was a financial fraud case wearing a termination's clothes, and Marcus Reed was not simply a man who had been treated unfairly. He was the one person who had tried quietly to stop it before it started and had been punished specifically because he almost succeeded. She did not go to her supervisor first. She drove straight to Marcus's house. He opened the door with Maya's laughter drifting from somewhere behind him. Some television show turned up too loud, the smell of dinner still hanging in the air. Elena stood on the porch and, for a moment, forgot the compliance officer she was supposed to be. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Not from the company. From me. I should have believed you the first day I read your file, before I needed proof to justify it." Marcus studied her for a long moment, the porch light catching the tired lines around her eyes. "You're the first person from that building who said that to my face and meant it. I have proof now. Real proof. It's worse than a bad write-up, Marcus. Pruitt's been stealing from federal contracts for over a year, and you're the reason it almost got caught 18 months ago, before he buried it deeper." Something shifted behind Marcus's eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like the quiet confirmation of something he had long suspected and never quite let himself fully believe. "I wrote those numbers down because I knew someone would need them eventually," he said. "I just didn't think it would take this long, or cost me my job to get there." He invited her in just for a few minutes, and for the first time since she had started the investigation, the conversation was not about compliance procedure at all. He told her, carefully, in careful pieces, about the years before Angela died, the Department of Defense contracts, the audit systems he had helped design from scratch, the reason a warehouse job had felt, at the time, like the only honest work left in a world that had already taken too much from him. He did not tell her everything that first night. He told her enough to matter. "Why a warehouse of all places?" Elena asked, genuinely curious, not writing anything down. "You could have gone anywhere. Consulting, government work, anywhere, because nobody there needed anything from me except my shift on time," Marcus said. "After Angela, that was the only kind of peace I could stand. Nobody asking me to be more than what I showed up as." Elena looked at him. Really looked. Past the compliance file, past the termination report, past the version of him she had built out of documents and camera footage, and understood, for the first time, that the quietest man in that warehouse had been carrying more weight than anyone around him had ever bothered to notice or ask about. Elena brought the full evidence file to Thomas Whitcomb 2 days later, the falsified write-up, the shell account records, the audit avoidance timeline laid out day by day, and Renee's anonymous email thread. He verified and cross-checked 3 separate ways before she would attach her name to any of it. Whitcomb called an emergency session of the Corvain Holdings Board that same afternoon and, without explaining why over the phone, requested David Pruitt's presence at corporate headquarters by 4 o'clock sharp. Pruitt arrived expecting a routine check-in about quarterly numbers, maybe a mild scolding about turnover rates. He wore his good suit. He shook hands in the hallway like a man on his way up, not down, still confident enough to make a joke with the receptionist about the weather. The room went quiet when he sat down at the long table. Whitcomb did not waste time with preamble or pleasantries. He laid out the timeline in plain, unhurried sentences: the falsified inventory records, the diverted freight, the shell account tucked 2 counties away, the termination filed 3 days before a federal audit that would have exposed all of it if it had gone forward on schedule. Pruitt's confidence drained out of his face in real time, color leaving him the way it leaves a man who understands, all at once, that the ground beneath him was never as solid as he had spent years believing it was. "This is a misunderstanding," Pruitt said. Too fast, too loud for the room. I can explain the numbers. Give me a week and I can explain all of it. You can explain them to federal investigators, Whitcomb said, calm, final. Your employment with this company is terminated, effective immediately. Legal will be in touch about the rest. Pruitt looked around the table for a single face that might argue on his behalf, a single ally left in the room. He found none. The same executives who had laughed at his jokes in the hallway an hour earlier now studied their own hands, their own folders, anything that was not his face. Somebody tell me who filed this, he said, voice cracking at the edges. Somebody tell me who came after me. A man you fired without cause, in front of 20 witnesses, 3 days before a federal audit, Whitcomb said. You did that part yourself, David. Nobody had to come after you. You walked into it. It was, though no one in that room remarked on it aloud, almost exactly the same stretch of minutes past the hour as the call Whitcomb had placed to Pruitt's office the morning Marcus was fired, a small, unspoken symmetry that only Whitcomb seemed to notice, and only for a second, before the room moved on to signatures and a security escort waiting by the elevator. Pruitt was walked out of the building he had run for 6 years by a security guard half his age, past the glass office where he had once slid a fabricated folder across a desk, without a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He said nothing on the way out. There was nothing left to say that would change what was waiting for him outside those doors, and some part of him seemed to know it before he reached the lobby. Marcus was not there to see any of it. He had asked, specifically, not to be told the exact time it would happen. He was home with Maya instead, helping her rebuild the volcano for a class presentation, baking soda fizzing pink over a cardboard mountain, while she narrated the eruption like a nature documentary host, complete with a dramatic pause before the eruption itself. He wanted no part of watching a man's downfall in real time. He had built his whole quiet life around not needing that particular kind of satisfaction anymore. Elena drove to his house that evening to deliver the news in person rather than by phone, feeling like it deserved more than a call. She sat on the porch steps beside him while Maya's volcano experiment echoed faintly through the screen door, half a cheer, half a science lecture, and told him, plainly, that it was over. Pruitt was gone. The fraud investigation was moving to federal authorities for further review. Marcus's name, in every version of the record now, would read exactly as it should have from the very beginning, a man who told the truth and was punished for it, and was now, finally, not punished for it anymore. Marcus did not celebrate. He sat with it quietly, the same stillness Elena had first noticed on the warehouse footage weeks ago, except now she understood it was not detachment at all. It was a man who had learned the hard way that justice arriving late still counted for something, but it did not erase what the waiting had already cost him, or what it had cost Angela's memory, or the years he had spent believing quiet was the same thing as safe. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice rougher than he meant it to be, "for believing it before you had proof to back it up." "I didn't believe it before I had proof," Elena admitted, looking at him directly. "I believed you before I had proof. There's a difference, and I think you know it." They sat together as the porch light buzzed on against the coming dark, moths already gathering around it, and neither of them moved to end the conversation, though both of them understood, without saying it out loud, that something between them had shifted from investigation into something neither one had a name for yet, and neither one felt any hurry to name it. In the weeks that followed, Halloran Freight and Logistics issued a formal public apology to Marcus Reed, reversed his termination on every record the company kept, and offered him a senior operations position with a salary that would have made most men in his position say yes without thinking twice. Marcus turned it down without hesitation. "I don't want to run their warehouse," he told Whitcomb over the phone, watching Maya do homework at the kitchen table behind him. "I want them to fix how they treat the people who run it now, and the people who'll run it after me." Instead, he asked for something smaller and harder, to give a binding company-wide policy requiring any termination tied to inventory or compliance flags to be reviewed by an outside auditor before it could ever be finalized, with real whistleblower protections written into every contract going forward, not just promised in an employee handbook nobody read. Whitcomb pushed it through the board within a month, citing the Halloran case by name in the final language, as the exact reason it could never be allowed to happen again. Renee Okafor was promoted to Regional Compliance Liaison, a role that had not existed before her name became attached, quietly and gratefully, to the case that ended David Pruitt's career and protected the next Marcus Reed before he ever needed protecting. She stopped by Marcus's house one evening with a bottle of sparkling cider and no real reason beyond wanting to say thank you in person, out loud, where he could hear it. "You didn't have to send that email," Marcus told her on the porch. "Neither did you have to make that call," Renee said, smiling for what felt like the first time in months. "Guess we were both done being quiet at the exact same time. Good timing, or bad, depending how you look at it." Elena and Marcus found reasons to see each other that had less and less to do with compliance paperwork as the weeks went on. A coffee that turned into an hour, a phone call about a policy detail that somehow lasted 40 minutes and covered almost nothing about policy at all. Maya, sharp as ever, noticed before either adult admitted anything out loud to themselves, let alone to each other. At the park one Saturday afternoon, while Marcus pushed her on the swings, Maya turned to Elena with the blunt honesty only children could manage without embarrassment. "Do you want to stay for dinner? Dad makes really good tacos, better than the ones at school, and way better than Tyler's dad's, according to Tyler, who has never even tried them." Elena laughed, caught off guard, and looked at Marcus over Maya's head, swinging higher now, arms out. "Only if your dad's actually asking," she said, and not just letting his daughter do it for him. "I'm asking," Marcus said, quiet, certain. The same stillness Elena had first mistaken for detachment now revealing itself, slowly, as something closer to steadiness, the kind a person could build a life around. "Come to dinner. I mean it." With his advisory standing at Corvain fully restored, and no longer a secret he had to guard behind a warehouse badge, Marcus used it for exactly one thing that mattered to him: a legal aid fund for warehouse and hourly workers across Richmond who faced retaliation for reporting the kind of quiet fraud that had almost buried him for good. He named it after Angela, without much explanation to anyone, and nobody who knew him needed one. Elena helped him build it from the compliance side, matching his cases against corporate policy loopholes late into several evenings, closing the gaps one contract at a time, one clause at a time. They worked well together in the unglamorous way that mattered more, in the end, than chemistry ever could on its own, patient with each other's silences, direct with each other's mistakes, neither one performing anything for the other's benefit. One evening, after a long session drafting the fund's first set of protections, Marcus set 2 mugs of coffee on the kitchen table and, without making a moment out of it, asked her to stay for dinner, not for Maya's sake this time, though Maya was already setting out 3 plates without being asked. For his own, Elena said yes before he even finished the sentence. Maya laughed too loud at her own jokes, spilled sauce on the tablecloth and apologized to the tablecloth directly, and asked Elena 3 separate times whether she liked dogs, apparently building toward a specific and long-standing request she had been saving for the right audience. Marcus watched the 2 of them from across the table, candlelight catching the edge of Elena's smile, and understood, without needing to announce it to himself in so many words, that he was not lonely anymore in the particular, quiet way he had been for 3 long years. Later, after Maya had been coaxed to bed with the promise of pancakes in the morning, Marcus and Elena sat on the porch with the last of the coffee gone cold between them, untouched. Neither said much. His hand found hers on the armrest, an ordinary gesture that felt, in the quiet of that evening, like the loudest thing either of them had done in a long time, louder than any boardroom, any phone call, any 15 minutes that had ever mattered before. Somewhere down the street a dog barked twice and went quiet. The porch light buzzed on above them, drawing the same moths it always drew, and neither of them moved to go inside just yet, both of them aware, without needing to say it, that they had finally arrived somewhere worth staying. It had taken 1 phone call to end David Pruitt's career, 15 minutes for the consequences to start arriving at his office door. It had taken far longer patience, real proof, and 2 people willing to believe each other before either one had all the answers for something better to begin quietly in its place. Marcus had learned, the hard way and then the gentle way, that the truth did not always move fast, but it moved. And when it finally arrived, it brought more than justice with it. It brought someone worth building a second life with, one Tuesday taco dinner at a time.